The Slack notification appeared at exactly 4:47 p.m. on a Friday afternoon, the kind of message that makes your stomach drop before you even open it. Sarah, please join me in the conference room immediately. Bring your laptop and badge. My hands were already shaking as I read the words from my manager, knowing that combination of items only meant one thing at TechFlow Solutions. I had been with the company for 6 years, climbing from junior developer to senior systems architect, surviving 3 rounds of layoffs and countless late nights debugging code that kept Austin's logistics companies running smoothly. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was about to be terminated by the very notification system I had helped design. The walk to conference room B felt like a death march. My manager, David Kim, sat across from a woman I didn't recognize. Her corporate smile as cold as the air conditioning that always ran too high in this building. The conversation was brief and clinical. Budget cuts, restructuring. My position was being eliminated effective immediately. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 20 minutes later, I sat in my Honda Civic in the TechFlow parking lot, a cardboard box of personal belongings in my passenger seat, and a severance packet that felt insultingly thin considering the years I'd devoted to this place. The late afternoon Texas sun beat down mercilessly, and I realized I had nowhere urgent to be for the first time in years. No meetings to attend, no code reviews to complete, no system alerts to respond to. My phone buzzed with a text from my brother Kevin. Family dinner Sunday at 6. Jess is making her famous lasagna. Don't be late. The exclamation point felt mockingly cheerful given my current circumstances. Sunday was still 2 days away, which meant I had the entire weekend to figure out how to break the news to my family that their successful tech professional daughter and sister was now unemployed. I drove aimlessly through Austin's early evening traffic, past the familiar landmarks that had defined my adult life. The University of Texas campus where I'd earned my computer science degree, the coffee shops where I'd spent countless hours, working on freelance projects to pay off student loans, the trendy restaurants in the Domain where Kevin and Jessica liked to meet for celebrations I could barely afford to attend. My apartment in Riverside was a modest 1-bedroom that I'd been proud to afford on my own, but suddenly it felt suffocating. The walls seemed to close in as I considered my financial reality. 3 months of severance pay, maybe 2 months of savings if I was careful, and a job market that had become increasingly competitive since the tech boom started cooling off. That evening, I did what I always did when life overwhelmed me. I opened my laptop and started coding. Not for any particular project or deadline, just the meditative rhythm of solving problems through logic and creativity. I had been working on a personal project for months, something I called FlowStream, an AI-powered system that could optimize logistics chains in real time by analyzing thousands of variables simultaneously. The idea had come to me during those late nights at TechFlow, watching how inefficiently cargo moved through Austin's distribution centers. Trucks would arrive empty while others sat fully loaded, waiting for paperwork. Warehouses would overflow, with products that weren't needed while desperately needed items sat delayed in traffic. The human brain couldn't process all the variables fast enough, but machine learning could predict patterns and optimize routes in ways that would save companies millions. I had built a prototype using public transportation data, creating algorithms that could reduce delivery times by up to 40% while cutting fuel costs significantly. But it was just a side project, something to tinker with after work hours. Now, staring at the code on my screen, I wondered if it could be something more. Sunday evening arrived with the oppressive humidity that defined Austin summers. Kevin and Jessica's house in Westlake Hills was everything mine wasn't. Spacious, professionally decorated, with a perfectly manicured lawn that probably cost more to maintain than my monthly rent. Jessica had married well, not just into money, but into the kind of social status that came with living in one of Austin's most exclusive neighborhoods. My parents, Robert and Linda, were already there when I arrived. Dad nursing a beer while discussing property values with Kevin, Mom helping Jessica arrange appetizers that looked like they belonged in a magazine. The scene was picture perfect. Domestic bliss. The kind that made me feel simultaneously grateful for family and acutely aware of how different my life had become from theirs. "Sarah!" Jessica greeted me with her trademark enthusiasm, the kind that always felt slightly performative. "You look tired, sweetie. Are you getting enough sleep? I keep telling Kevin you work too hard at that tech place." "Tech Flow," I corrected, gently, though the company name felt strange on my tongue now that I no longer worked there. "Right, Tech Flow. All those late nights can't be healthy. You should try yoga. I've been going to this amazing studio in the Domain, and it's completely transformed my stress levels." I nodded politely, not mentioning that yoga classes cost more than I currently felt comfortable spending on anything non-essential. Jessica meant well, but she had the luxury of treating stress as something that could be solved through wellness retreats and expensive hobbies. Kevin appeared from the kitchen, looking every inch the successful marketing executive in his polo shirt and khakis, even on a casual Sunday. At 29, he had already achieved the kind of conventional success that made parents proud. Steady, job, beautiful wife, nice house, plans for children that would complete the picture-perfect family narrative. "Hey, sis," he said, giving me a quick hug. "How's the tech world treating you? Still saving the world one line of code at a time?" The question was meant to be playful, but it hit differently, knowing I no longer had any code to write professionally. "Something like that," I managed, hoping my smile didn't look as forced as it felt. Dinner conversation flowed around me like background noise. Jessica talked about the interior design project she was working on for a client's lake house. Kevin shared stories about his latest marketing campaign for a luxury car dealership. Dad complained about tax season and difficult clients at his accounting practice. Mom updated everyone on the neighbors' various dramas and achievements. I contributed when prompted, but mostly I observed, noticing things I'd never paid attention to before. The casual way Kevin mentioned bonuses and raises, the expensive wine Jessica served without thinking about the cost, the comfortable assumption that financial stability was a given rather than something to be grateful for. "Sarah's been awfully quiet," Mom observed during a lull in conversation. "Everything okay at work, honey?" The moment I'd been dreading had arrived with the subtlety of a freight train. 5 pairs of eyes turned toward me expectantly, and suddenly the spacious dining room felt cramped. I could have deflected, made small talk about projects and deadlines, bought myself more time to figure out how to break the news gently. Instead, the words tumbled out before I could stop them. "Actually, I lost my job on Friday." The silence that followed was deafening. Jessica's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Kevin's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Mom's hand went to her chest in that dramatic way she'd perfected over years of reacting to family news. "Lost your job?" Dad repeated, as if he hadn't heard correctly. "What do you mean, lost your job?" "Laid off. Budget cuts. My position was eliminated." Each word felt like admitting failure, even though I knew intellectually that layoffs were business decisions, not personal judgments. "But you've been there for years," Kevin said, his marketing-trained voice immediately shifting into problem-solving mode. "Surely they offered you something else, maybe a different department." I shook my head. "They cut the entire systems architecture team, said they were outsourcing those functions to reduce overhead." Jessica made sympathetic noises, but I could see the calculations happening behind her eyes. Unemployed sister-in-law meant potential requests for help, possible disruptions to their comfortable routine. "Oh, Sarah, that's terrible. But you'll find something else quickly, right? I mean, you're so smart with computers." The phrase "smart with computers" stung more than it should have. It reduced 6 years of specialized expertise to the kind of casual dismissal that people used when they didn't understand what you actually did for a living. "The job market is pretty competitive right now. I admitted. Might take some time. How long? Dad asked, his accountant's mind immediately jumping to financial implications. I don't know. Could be a few months. Mom leaned forward with the concerned expression she'd worn throughout my childhood whenever I came home with scraped knees or broken hearts. Do you have enough savings to get by? Because you know we'd help if we could. But business has been slow at the practice, and we're trying to build up our retirement fund. The offer was genuine, but came with caveats that made it clear help would be limited and probably come with strings attached. I appreciated the sentiment while recognizing the boundaries. I'll be fine, I said, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. I have some severance, and I've been working on a project. That might turn into something. Kevin perked up at this. What kind of project? This was dangerous territory. My family had never really understood what I did professionally beyond computer stuff, and trying to explain artificial intelligence and logistics optimization at a dinner table felt like setting myself up for blank stares and well-meaning but unhelpful suggestions. It's a software application for optimizing supply chains, I said, keeping it as simple as possible, using machine learning to predict and improve delivery routes. Like GPS? Jessica asked. More complex than that. It's about analyzing thousands of variables simultaneously to predict optimal logistics patterns before they happen, not just after traffic has already formed. The explanation fell flat, as I'd expected. They nodded politely, but I could see their interest waning as soon as I mentioned technical concepts they couldn't immediately relate to their own experiences. Well, that sounds complicated, Mom said, with the tone she'd used when I was 8, and tried to explain how I'd programmed our VCR to record shows. But maybe you should focus on finding a regular job first, something stable, and work on your project as a hobby. Your mom's right, Dad added. Hobbies are great, but you need steady income. Have you thought about applying to some of the bigger Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Companies? Apple has that campus down south, and I hear they pay well. The suggestion revealed how little they understood about the tech industry. Apple's Austin facility was primarily manufacturing and support, not the kind of software development work I specialized in, but explaining the difference felt exhausting. I'll look into all options, I said diplomatically. Kevin, perhaps sensing my frustration, tried to pivot the conversation. You know, Sarah, if you need help updating your resume or practicing interviews, I could give you some pointers. Marketing and tech aren't that different. It's all about selling yourself and your skills. The offer was well-intentioned, but it highlighted the fundamental misunderstanding about what I did. Marketing was about presentation and persuasion. Software engineering was about solving complex problems through code. The skills weren't interchangeable, but trying to explain that would sound defensive and ungrateful. Thanks, I appreciate that, I said instead. As dinner wound down, the conversation drifted to safer topics. Tyler's upcoming kindergarten enrollment, Jessica's plans for redecorating their master bedroom, Kevin's company softball team. I participated when directly addressed, but found myself mentally calculating how quickly I could politely excuse myself. When I finally announced I needed to leave, citing an early morning job search, Jessica hugged me with exaggerated sympathy. Everything happens for a reason, Sarah. Maybe this is the universe's way of pushing you toward something better. Kevin walked me to my car, his expression more serious than it had been inside. Listen, sis, I know tonight was awkward, but we're family. If you really get into trouble, we'll figure something out, okay? The offer was genuine, but it came with unspoken conditions. Help would be available if I truly hit rock bottom, but it would come with expectations about how grateful I should be and how quickly I should return to self-sufficiency. It was the kind of safety net that existed more in theory than practice. I know, I said. Thanks. Driving home through the empty streets of Austin, I felt more isolated than I had in years. My family loved me. I didn't doubt that. But they didn't understand me or the work I did or the dreams I carried. To them, I was the smart daughter who worked with computers and should be able to find another computer job without too much trouble. The reality was more complex. The tech industry was undergoing massive changes, with artificial intelligence reshaping entire sectors while eliminating traditional roles. The skills I'd developed over 6 years were valuable, but they needed to be applied in new ways, toward problems that didn't exist when I'd started my career. Back in my apartment, I opened my laptop and stared at the FlowStream code I'd been developing. What if Mom was wrong? What if this wasn't just a hobby project to work on after finding a real job? What if it was the real job, the career pivot, that could transform not just my financial situation, but my entire relationship with work and success? The logistics industry was worth trillions of dollars globally, but it operated with shocking inefficiency. Companies lost billions annually to poor route planning, delayed deliveries, and inventory mismanagement. My prototype could address these problems in ways that existing solutions couldn't match. I had 3 months of severance pay and enough savings to survive for maybe 2 additional months if I was careful. 5 months total to turn a side project into something that could support me financially. It was risky, maybe reckless, but the alternative was submitting hundreds of job applications for positions that might not exist by the time the interview process concluded. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of spending Monday morning updating my resume and scouring job boards, I would dedicate my full attention to FlowStream. I would build it into something real, something valuable, something that proved my family wrong about the difference between hobbies and opportunities. I had no idea that within 6 months, that decision would lead to the biggest venture capital deal in Austin's history, or that the family who had patted me on the head and suggested I find a real job would be reading about my success in the Wall Street Journal. All I knew was that I had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt since receiving that Slack notification. I wasn't just unemployed, I was free. Free from office politics and arbitrary deadlines and managers who didn't understand the potential of what I was building. For the first time in my adult life, I could focus entirely on my own vision instead of someone else's quarterly targets. I spent the day reorganizing my apartment into a proper workspace, setting up multiple monitors and creating the kind of development environment I'd always wanted, but never had time to build while juggling a full-time job. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. By evening, I had a plan. 3 months to build a minimum viable product. 2 months to find initial clients and prove market demand. If I couldn't generate enough revenue by then to extend my runway, I would admit defeat and return to traditional job hunting. But as I wrote my first lines of code as an entrepreneur, rather than an employee, something told me that wouldn't be necessary. I was about to build something that would change not just my life, but the entire logistics industry. I just didn't know it yet. The first month of unemployment felt like diving into an alternate universe where time moved differently. Without the artificial urgency of corporate deadlines and pointless meetings, I discovered a rhythm of productivity I'd never experienced before. I woke up naturally around 7, made coffee that I actually had time to savor, and settled into coding sessions that could stretch for hours without interruption. FlowStream was evolving rapidly from a weekend hobby into something that might actually work in the real world. The core algorithm was sound. I'd proven that much with the transportation data simulations. But building a commercial-grade application required architecting systems that could handle massive data loads while maintaining split-second response times. The challenge was fascinating in ways that my old job had never been. At TechFlow, I'd spent most of my time maintaining legacy systems and implementing features that other people had designed. Here, every decision was mine to make. Every problem was mine to solve. and every breakthrough felt personal in a way that corporate work never had. I was deep in debugging a particularly stubborn machine learning model when my phone rang. Kevin's name appeared on the screen, and I almost let it go to voicemail before remembering that avoiding family wouldn't make my situation any less precarious. "Hey, how's the job hunt going?" he asked without preamble, his voice carrying that forced cheerfulness that people use when discussing uncomfortable topics. "It's going," I replied, which was technically true if you considered building a startup as an extended form of job hunting. "Listen, I've been thinking about your situation, and I might have some good news. Jessica's dad knows someone who runs IT for a medical device company. It's not exactly what you were doing before, but it's stable work, and they're looking for someone with your background." The offer was presented as a favor, a family connection leveraging their network to help me out of a tough spot. I should have been grateful, but instead I felt a familiar frustration at how they consistently underestimated what I was capable of achieving on my own. "What kind of IT work?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. "System administration, maybe some database management. Look, I know it's not glamorous, but it's a foot in the door and you can always look for something better once you're employed." Again, system administration. After 6 years of building complex software architectures, they wanted me to reset passwords and update server configurations. It was like asking a chef to become a dishwasher because at least it was still food-related work. "I appreciate you thinking of me," I said carefully, "but I'm actually making good progress on some other opportunities." "What other opportunities?" "Sarah, you can't afford to be picky right now. This job market isn't going to get any easier, and the longer you're unemployed, the harder it becomes to explain the gap." The conversation was heading toward familiar territory, Kevin assuming he understood my industry better than I did, offering advice based on conventional wisdom that didn't apply to specialized technical roles. I could feel my patience wearing thin. "I'm working on developing my own software application," I said, deciding to be direct. "The logistics optimization project I mentioned at dinner. I think it has real commercial potential." There was a pause, and I could practically hear him formulating his response. "Sarah, that's great as a side project, but you need steady income. You can't eat potential." "It's not just potential anymore. I've built a working prototype that can reduce delivery costs by 30 to 40%. That's huge in an industry worth trillions of dollars. But do you have customers? Do you have revenue? Because potential doesn't pay rent." The question stung because they highlighted the gap between having a brilliant technical solution and building a sustainable business around it. I had the technology, but I didn't have the sales experience or business connections to turn it into immediate income. "I'm working on that part," I admitted. "Look, I'm not trying to be negative, but you've never run a business before. You don't know anything about marketing or sales or raising money. Maybe you should get that IT job to cover your expenses while you figure out the business stuff." Kevin meant well, but his advice revealed how little he understood about the opportunity I was pursuing. Flowstream wasn't a hobby that could be developed during evenings and weekends. It required full-time focus to compete with the venture-backed startups and established companies that were working on similar problems. "I'll think about it," I said, knowing I wouldn't but wanting to end the conversation before it became an argument. After hanging up, I stared at my laptop screen, suddenly seeing my code through Kevin's eyes. Lines of text that meant nothing to him. A project that seemed like elaborate procrastination rather than serious business development. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was being naive about what it took to turn technical innovation into financial success. But then I ran my latest simulation, watching as the algorithm optimized a complex delivery scenario in real time, finding solutions that would save a theoretical company hundreds of thousands of dollars annually. The numbers didn't lie, even if I wasn't sure how to translate them into immediate personal income. That afternoon brought an email that changed everything. Marcus Chen, a former colleague from TechFlow, had reached out asking if I wanted to grab coffee. Marcus had left the company 6 months earlier to join a venture capital firm that specialized in logistics and supply chain investments. I'd stayed in touch sporadically, but we hadn't spoken since my layoff. We met at Café Medici on Guadalupe Street, one of those Austin institutions that managed to maintain its character despite the city's rapid growth. Marcus looked different than he had at TechFlow, more polished, wearing the kind of expensive casual clothes that signaled success in the startup world. "I heard about the layoffs," he said after we'd gotten our drinks and found a table near the window. "That was brutal timing, especially after everything you contributed to that place." "It is what it is," I replied, not wanting to dwell on the circumstances that had led me here. "Actually, that's kind of why I wanted to talk to you. I've been following the logistics tech space pretty closely in my new role, and there's a lot of investment interest in AI-powered optimization solutions. Are you working on anything in that area?" The question felt like fate intervening in my life at precisely the right moment. Marcus wasn't just making small talk. He was actively looking for investment opportunities in exactly the space I'd been developing FlowStream. "Funny you should ask," I said, pulling out my laptop. "Mind if I show you something?" For the next 30 minutes, I walked Marcus through FlowStream's capabilities, showing him the simulation results and explaining the technical architecture that made it possible. His expression grew more interested as I demonstrated how the Y system could process real-time data from multiple sources to predict and prevent logistical bottlenecks before they occurred. "This is impressive," he said when I finished the demonstration. "How long have you been working on it?" "About 8 months, but only full-time for the last few weeks." "And you built this entirely yourself?" I nodded, suddenly self-conscious about how that might sound to someone accustomed to venture-backed teams with multiple engineers and business development specialists. "Sarah, this is exactly the kind of solution our portfolio companies are looking for. Have you thought about raising investment to accelerate development?" The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on building the technology that I hadn't seriously considered the business side of scaling it. Raising money meant giving up equity, bringing in partners, transforming my personal project into something that belonged partly to other people. "I haven't really thought that far ahead," I admitted. "You should. This market is moving fast, and first-mover advantage matters. If you can get a working product to market in the next 6 months, you could capture significant market share before the bigger players catch up." Marcus spent the next hour explaining the venture capital process, describing how early-stage investments worked and what kinds of terms I might expect for a seed funding round. The numbers he mentioned were staggering. Even a modest seed round could provide enough runway to hire a team, accelerate development, and launch commercially within months rather than years. "There's one catch," he said as we prepared to leave. "Our fund doesn't invest in solo founders. Too much risk if something happens to the key person. You'd need to bring in at least one co-founder, ideally someone with complementary skills in business development or marketing." The requirement made sense from an investment perspective, but it complicated my vision of maintaining complete control over FlowStream's development. Finding the right co-founder meant finding someone who understood the technology, shared my vision for the product, and brought skills I lacked. "Do you have anyone in mind?" Marcus asked. I didn't, but I told him I'd think about it. We exchanged contact information with the understanding that I'd reach out once I'd found a potential co-founder and was ready to discuss investments seriously. Walking back to my car, I felt like I'd just glimpsed a possible future that was both exhilarating and terrifying. 6 months ago, I'd been a mid-level employee at a consulting company, following other people's specifications and attending meetings that accomplished nothing. Now I was potentially on the verge of raising venture capital for a company that existed only in my laptop and my imagination. That evening, I called Elena Rodriguez, my neighbor and closest friend in Austin. Elena was a freelance marketing consultant who specialized in helping tech startups develop their brand identity and customer acquisition strategies. If I was going to need a co-founder with business skills, she was the obvious choice. "You want me to help you what?" she asked after I'd explained the opportunity Marcus had presented. "Co-found a logistics optimization startup. I've got the technology, but I need someone who understands how to turn it into a real business." Elena had been following my post-employment journey with interest, occasionally checking in to see how I was handling the transition from corporate employee to unemployed developer. She'd been supportive but pragmatic, encouraging me to pursue FlowStream while also suggesting I keep my options open for traditional employment. "Sarah, do you realize what you're asking? Starting a company isn't like taking a freelance project. It's a full-time commitment that could take years to pay off, if it ever does." "I know it's a big decision," I said. "But Marcus thinks we could raise a seed round based on what I've built so far. That would give us runway to develop the product properly and start acquiring customers." "How much runway?" He mentioned numbers in the 500,000 to 2 million range for a seed round. Elena was quiet for a long moment. As a marketing consultant, she understood both the potential and the risks of startup life better than most people. She'd worked with dozens of early-stage companies, watching some succeed spectacularly while others burned through their funding and failed to achieve product-market fit. "Can I see what you've built?" she asked finally. We spent the next evening in my apartment, Elena asking detailed questions about FlowStream's capabilities, while I demonstrated various features and explained the market opportunity. She approached it like the marketing professional she was, thinking about target customers and competitive positioning rather than technical architecture. "This is actually really compelling," she said after I'd shown her the cost savings projections. "The ROI story practically sells itself. But you're going to need more than just savings projections to convince enterprise customers to switch from their existing systems." "What do you mean?" "Integration complexity, change management, training, costs, reliability concerns. Enterprise software sales aren't just about having the best technology. They're about minimizing risk for decision makers who could lose their jobs if an implementation goes badly." Elena's perspective highlighted gaps in my thinking that I hadn't fully considered. I'd been focused on building the most technically sophisticated solution possible, but commercial success required understanding customer psychology and organizational dynamics that were completely separate from algorithmic efficiency. "So you think it's a bad idea?" I asked. "Actually, I think it's a great idea, but it needs to be executed properly. You've got brilliant technology, but you need someone who understands how to package it, position it, and sell it to people who aren't impressed by technical elegance." Over the next week, Elena and I had several more conversations about the possibility of working together. She was intrigued by the opportunity, but cautious about abandoning her established consulting practice for the uncertainty of startup life. "What's your timeline for making this decision?" she asked during one of our coffee meetings. "Marcus wants to set up meetings with potential investors within the next month. If we're going to do this, we need to move quickly." "And if we raise money, what's the plan? How do we split equity? What are our roles and responsibilities?" These were exactly the kinds of questions I'd been avoiding, because they forced me to confront the reality that pursuing venture capital meant giving up sole ownership of something I'd created entirely myself. But they were also the questions that separated serious entrepreneurs from people who just like to tinker with interesting projects. "I was thinking 60-40, I said. "I get 60% because I built the core technology. You get 40% because you'd be handling everything else." Elena considered this. "That seems fair, assuming we're both working full-time and taking the same financial risk." The equity split felt strange to discuss, like negotiating over something that didn't yet exist but might someday be worth millions or nothing at all. But it was also exciting to have these conversations with someone who took the opportunity as seriously as I did. "There's one more thing," Elena said. "If we do this, we need to be completely honest with each other about our financial situations. How long can you survive without income?" "Maybe 3 more months if I'm really careful." "I can probably Go 4 or 5 months, but that's cutting it close. So we'd need to raise money quickly, or we'd need to generate revenue almost immediately. The conversation forced me to confront the timeline pressure I'd been trying to ignore. Venture capital processes could take months, and there was no guarantee we'd successfully raise money even with a promising product. If we failed to secure funding quickly, we'd both be in difficult financial positions. But the alternative, taking. The IT job Kevin had suggested, and treating FlowStream as a weekend hobby, felt like giving up on the biggest opportunity I'd ever had. The logistics industry was ripe for disruption, and I had technology that could genuinely transform how goods moved around the world. Missing this moment because I was afraid of financial risk seemed like a bigger mistake than taking the leap. "Let's do it," I said finally. Elena smiled, extending her hand for a formal handshake. Partners? Partners. That night, I called Marcus to let him know I'd found a co-founder and was ready to start the investment process. He was enthusiastic about Elena's background and suggested we prepare a pitch deck and financial projections for initial investor meetings. The next few weeks blurred together as Elena and I worked to transform FlowStream from a personal project into something that looked like a real company. We incorporated as FlowStream Technologies, developed a comprehensive business plan, and created presentation materials that explained our vision for revolutionizing logistics optimization. The work was intense, but exhilarating. For the first time since losing my job at TechFlow, I felt like I was building something that could provide not just employment, but genuine professional fulfillment. Instead of implementing other people's specifications, I was creating solutions to problems I'd identified myself. Elena brought a perspective to the business that I'd been missing entirely. She helped me understand that our customers wouldn't just be buying software. They'd be buying results, peace of mind, and competitive advantage. The technical capabilities I'd focused on were important, but only insofar as they delivered measurable business value. "We're not selling logistics, optimization," she explained during one of our late-night planning sessions. "We're selling profit improvement and risk reduction. The AI is just the mechanism." This reframing helped me see FlowStream through the eyes of potential customers and investors. Instead of leading with technical specifications, our pitch emphasized financial outcomes and competitive advantages. The technology was still sophisticated, but it was positioned as a means to an end rather than an end in itself. By the time Marcus arranged our first investor meeting, Elena and I had transformed from hesitant collaborators into a focused founding team with a clear vision for building a significant business. We had realistic financial projections, a detailed product roadmap, and answers to the kinds of questions that investors would inevitably ask. The meeting was scheduled for the following week with James Parker, a partner at Austin Ventures who specialized in early-stage enterprise software companies. According to Marcus, Parker had a reputation for asking tough questions, but also for moving quickly when he saw something promising. As I prepared for what could be the most important business meeting of my life, I thought about the family dinner where I'd announced my unemployment just 2 months earlier. Kevin's well-meaning suggestion about system administration work seemed like it belonged to a different lifetime, a conversation between different people who had no idea what was actually possible. In less than a week, I would either secure the funding to transform FlowStream into a real company, or I would learn that the gap between technical innovation and commercial success was wider than I'd imagined. Either way, I was about to find out whether my decision to walk away from traditional employment had been brilliant or catastrophically naive. The night before the investor meeting, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed reviewing our pitch, thinking through potential questions and objections, wondering if Elena and I had built something that could actually compete in the brutal world of enterprise software sales. My phone buzzed with a text message from Mom. "How's the job search going, honey? Dad ran into someone at the grocery store who said their company might be hiring programmers." I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "Thanks, but I think I'm going in a different direction." It was a massive understatement, but it was also the truth. In 12 hours, I would either be the co-founder of a venture-backed startup, or I would be back to updating my resume and pretending that my biggest professional achievement was maintaining other people's legacy code. But for the first time since losing my job at TechFlow, I wasn't afraid of the uncertainty. I was excited by it. The Austin Ventures office occupied the entire 23rd floor of a downtown high-rise, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city I'd called home for nearly a decade. James Parker was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with the kind of understated confidence that came from making successful bets on companies that others had overlooked. His office was sparse but expensive, featuring a single piece of abstract art that probably cost more than my car and a conference table that could seat 12 people, but would host only the 4 of us. Marcus made introductions while Parker's assistant brought coffee in cups that were nicer than anything I owned. The small talk was brief. Parker had a reputation for cutting straight to business, and he lived up to it by asking us to begin our presentation within 5 minutes of sitting down. Elena handled the opening, positioning FlowStream as a solution to a multi-billion-dollar problem that existing companies were failing to address adequately. Her background in marketing showed as she walked through market size calculations and competitive analysis, building the case for why logistics optimization represented a massive investment opportunity. When she handed the presentation over to me, I felt the familiar surge of confidence that came from discussing technology I understood better than anyone else in the room. The technical demonstration went smoothly, with FlowStream processing, real-time data scenarios, and generating optimization recommendations that would save theoretical companies substantial money and time. Parker asked detailed questions throughout the presentation, probing our assumptions about market adoption rates and competitive responses. His questions were sharp but not hostile, the kind of interrogation that seemed designed to understand our thinking rather than expose weaknesses for their own sake. "The technology is impressive," he said when we'd finished the formal presentation. "But enterprise software sales cycles are long and expensive. How do you plan to acquire customers without burning through your entire seed round on sales and marketing?" Elena fielded this question, outlining our customer acquisition strategy that focused on pilot programs with mid-sized logistics companies rather than trying to land massive enterprise deals immediately. The approach was designed to generate case studies and revenue quickly while building toward larger opportunities. "What's your revenue model?" Parker asked next. "Software as a service with usage-based pricing," I replied. "Companies pay a base subscription fee plus additional costs based on the volume of shipments they're optimizing through our platform." "And you've validated this pricing model with potential customers?" This was where our preparation met the limits of our actual market experience. Elena and I had researched pricing extensively and spoken with several logistics managers, but we hadn't conducted formal customer discovery interviews or signed letters of intent. "We've had preliminary conversations with several companies," Elena said carefully. "The feedback has been positive, but we haven't started formal sales processes yet." Parker nodded, making notes on a legal pad. His expression was unreadable, which made me increasingly nervous as the meeting progressed. I'd expected either enthusiasm or skepticism, not the poker-faced analysis he was providing. "Tell me about your background," he said, directing the question at both of us. "What makes you the right team to build this company?" I walked through my experience at TechFlow and my technical expertise in systems architecture and machine learning. Elena described her marketing consulting work and her track record helping startups develop their go-to-market strategies. We tried to present ourselves as complementary partners whose combined skills addressed the key challenges of building an enterprise software company. "Have either of you run a company before?" The question we'd been dreading hung in the air. Neither Elena nor I had CEO experience, and admitting that to a professional investor felt like confessing to being unqualified for the opportunity we were pursuing. "No," I said finally. "But we're both fast learners, and we're committed to surrounding ourselves with advisors who have experience scaling software companies. Parker smiled for the first time during the meeting. That's the right answer. The worst thing you can do is pretend to have experience you don't have, or resist bringing in people who know more than you do. The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, covering everything from our patent strategy to our plans for international expansion. Parker's questions revealed the depth of analysis that venture capitalists applied to investment decisions, considering factors I'd never thought about like regulatory risks and potential acquirer interest. When the formal meeting concluded, Parker walked us to the elevator, shaking hands and telling us he'd be in touch within a week. His demeanor was professional, but gave no indication of whether he was interested in moving forward. "How do you think it went?" Elena asked as we waited for the elevator. "I honestly have no idea," I replied. He didn't seem excited, but he didn't seem dismissive either. The elevator ride down was silent, both of us processing what had just happened. We'd spent weeks preparing for this meeting, and now it was over in less than 2 hours. Our entire future hinged on Parker's analysis of our presentation and his assessment of whether FlowStream represented a worthwhile investment risk. We grabbed lunch at a nearby restaurant, dissecting every question and response, trying to read meaning into Parker's expressions and body language. It was an exercise in futility, but we needed to debrief before returning to the regular work of building the company. "At least we know we can present professionally," Elena said, picking at her salad. "If this doesn't work out, we'll be better prepared for the next investor meeting." The assumption that there would be a next meeting if this one failed was optimistic but comforting. We'd spent so much energy focusing on this single opportunity that we hadn't developed a backup plan for rejection. "Marcus said Parker usually makes decisions quickly," I said. "If he's interested, he'll want to schedule a follow-up meeting with his partners within the next few days." We agreed to continue working on product development while we waited for Parker's response. The waiting was excruciating, but it was also productive. I made significant improvements to FlowStream's user interface, while Elena drafted marketing materials and refined our customer acquisition plan. 3 days later, my phone rang at 8 in the morning. Parker's name appeared on the screen, and I felt my heart rate spike as I answered. "Sarah, I hope I'm not calling too early. I wanted to discuss next steps for FlowStream." The phrase "next steps" suggested he was interested, but I forced myself to remain calm until he spelled out his intentions clearly. "My partners and I were impressed with your presentation," he continued. "We'd like to move forward with due diligence and term sheet negotiations." Relief flooded through me so intensely that I had to sit down. "That's fantastic news. What does the process look like from here?" Parker explained that due diligence would involve detailed analysis of our technology, market research, and financial projections. Assuming everything checked out, they would present a term sheet outlining their investment offer and the equity stake they would require. "What's your timeline for raising this round?" he asked. "We'd like to close within the next 6 to 8 weeks, I said, remembering Elena's warning about our personal financial situations. "That's aggressive, but doable. I'll have my team send over the due diligence request list this afternoon." After hanging up, I immediately called Elena with the news. Her excitement matched my own, but she quickly shifted into practical mode, discussing what the due diligence process would require and how we should prepare. The next few weeks were a blur of activity, unlike anything I'd experienced. Austin. Venture's due diligence team requested detailed information about every aspect of our business, from technical architecture documentation to market research reports to financial projections extending 5 years into the future. Elena and I worked 16-hour days preparing responses, organizing data, and refining our business plan based on questions the investors were asking. The process was exhausting but educational, forcing us to think through aspects of the business that we'd addressed superficially in our initial planning. The technical due diligence was particularly intense. Austin Ventures brought in external experts to review FlowStream's code, assess our intellectual property position, and evaluate our competitive advantages. I spent hours on calls with their technical advisors, walking through the system architecture and explaining the machine learning algorithms that powered our optimization engine. Meanwhile, Elena fielded questions about our market analysis and customer acquisition strategy. The investors wanted to understand not just whether our technology worked, but whether we could build a sustainable business around it in a competitive market. During this period, I had minimal contact with my family. The intensity of the fundraising process left little time for social activities or family dinners, and I was reluctant to discuss what we were doing until we had a definitive outcome. The last thing I wanted was to announce that we were raising venture capital, only to have the deal fall through and leave me unemployed again. Kevin called several times, asking about my job search and repeating his offer to connect me with his contacts. I deflected these conversations as politely as possible, telling him I was pursuing several opportunities without going into specifics. "You're being awfully secretive," he said during one call. "Are you sure everything's okay? Mom's worried that you're not taking this unemployment thing seriously enough." The comment irritated me more than it should have. I was working harder than I'd ever worked in my life, pursuing an opportunity that could generate more value than anything I'd accomplished in 6 years at TechFlow. But because my family couldn't see me going to an office every day, they assumed I was being irresponsible about my career. "I'm taking it very seriously," I said. "I just don't want to discuss specific opportunities until they're more concrete." 3 weeks into due diligence, Parker called to schedule a final presentation meeting with Austin Ventures' full investment committee. This would be our opportunity to address any remaining concerns and make the case for why they should invest in FlowStream. "How are you feeling about the deal?" Elena asked as we prepared for this crucial meeting. "Cautiously optimistic," I replied. "They wouldn't be bringing us back if they weren't seriously interested. But venture capital is never a sure thing until the money hits your bank account." The investment committee meeting was more formal than our initial presentation, with 8 partners sitting around a conference table asking detailed questions about our business model, competitive strategy, and growth plans. But it felt less intimidating than the first meeting because we'd spent weeks thinking through exactly these issues during due diligence. The questions were sophisticated but fair, focusing on execution risks and market dynamics rather than fundamental flaws in our approach. By the time we finished the presentation, I felt confident that we'd addressed their concerns and demonstrated our readiness to build a significant company. Parker walked us out after the meeting, his demeanor more relaxed than it had been during the formal presentation. "The committee was impressed," he said as we waited for the elevator. "Assuming we can agree on terms, I think we're going to move forward." The term sheet arrived 2 days later via email, outlining Austin Ventures' offer to invest $1.2 million in exchange for 25% of FlowStream Technologies. The valuation was lower than I'd hoped, but higher than Elena had expected, reflecting the early stage of our business, but also the potential they saw in our technology. Elena and I spent the evening reviewing the terms with a lawyer we'd hired to represent us in the negotiation. Most of the provisions were standard for early-stage venture deals, but there were a few points we wanted to negotiate, particularly around employee stock option pools and board representation. The negotiation process took another week, with our lawyer and Austin Ventures legal team exchanging revised drafts and resolving minor issues. By the time we signed the final documents, nearly 2 months had passed since our initial investor meeting. On the day the investment funds transferred to our business bank account, Elena and I celebrated with an expensive dinner at one of Austin's best restaurants. For the first time since losing my job at TechFlow, I felt financially secure and professionally validated. "So, what now?" Elena asked over dessert. "Now we build the company we promised them we could build," I replied. The next morning, we started the process of hiring our first employees, setting up a proper office space, and accelerating FlowStream's development toward a commercial launch. We had 18 months of runway, assuming we managed our spending carefully to prove that our technology could generate sustainable revenue and justify additional investment rounds. But even as we celebrated this milestone, I knew the real work was just beginning. Raising money was an achievement, but it was also a responsibility. We now had investors counting on us to deliver returns, employees depending on us for their livelihoods, and customers who would soon rely on our technology to optimize their operations. The phone call from Mom came 3 days after we closed, the funding round. I'd been expecting it, knowing that word would eventually reach my family about what Elena and I were doing. "Sarah, honey, Mrs. Henderson from down the street said she saw an article in the Business Journal about you starting a company. Is that true?" The Austin Business Journal had published a brief article about local startups that had recently raised funding, mentioning FlowStream Technologies and our $1.2 million seed round. It was a small mention, but enough to attract attention from people who knew me. "Yes, it's true," I said, bracing myself for the conversation that would follow. "Why didn't you tell us? We've been worried sick about your job situation, and all this time you were starting your own business." The hurt in her voice was genuine, and I felt guilty for keeping my family in the dark during the fundraising process. But I'd also learned from experience that they didn't understand my work well enough to provide meaningful support during stressful periods. "I didn't want to say anything until I knew it was going to work out," I explained. "Fundraising is uncertain, and I didn't want everyone worrying about something that might not happen. But we could have helped somehow. Your father knows about business finances, and Kevin understands marketing." The offer was well-intentioned, but revealed the persistent gap between their perception of what I was doing and the reality of building a technology startup. Kevin's marketing experience was in traditional advertising for established companies, not the complex world of enterprise software sales. Dad's accounting practice involved tax preparation and bookkeeping, not venture capital negotiations and equity structures. "I appreciate that," I said. "But Elena and I had the expertise we needed, and we hired professionals for the legal and financial aspects." "Elena? You mean your neighbor? She's your business partner now?" "She's my co-founder. We're building this company together." There was a pause as Mom processed this information. "How much money did you raise?" The article didn't specify. $1.2 million. The silence that followed was longer than I'd expected. When Mom finally responded, her voice carried a mixture of pride and bewilderment. "Sarah, that's incredible. I had no idea you were doing something so ambitious." "Thanks, Mom. It's been a lot of work, but we're excited about what we're building." "Your father's going to want to hear all about this. Can you come to dinner this Sunday and explain everything?" The invitation felt different from the family dinners I'd attended in the past. Instead of being asked to explain why I wasn't succeeding, I was being asked to share how I had succeeded. The role reversal was subtle but significant. "Sure," I said. "I'd be happy to tell everyone about FlowStream." As I hung up, I realized that something fundamental had changed in my relationship with my family. They still didn't understand the technical details of what I did, but they could no longer dismiss it as impractical hobby work. The validation of professional investors had given my choices a credibility that my own explanations had never achieved. Sunday's family dinner was unlike any I'd experienced before. Instead of deflecting questions about my career, I found myself at the center of attention, fielding interested inquiries about entrepreneurship and venture capital. Kevin seemed particularly fascinated by the business side of what we'd accomplished. "So you own 75% of a company that investors think is worth almost $5 million? He asked, working through the math of our valuation. "On paper," I replied, "but it's only worth that much if we can execute on our business, plan and build something valuable." "Still, that's amazing. I had no idea you were working on something this big." The conversation continued late into the evening, with Jessica asking about our hiring plans and Dad wanting to understand our revenue projections. For the first time, They treated my work as something worthy of serious discussion rather than concerned sympathy. As I drove home that night, I reflected on how much had changed in just 4 months since losing my job at TechFlow. I'd gone from unemployed and uncertain to venture-backed entrepreneur with a clear vision for building a significant company. More importantly, I'd proven to myself and my family that the technical skills they'd never fully understood could translate into real business value. But I also knew that raising money was just the beginning. Now, Elena and I had to deliver on the promises we'd made to our investors, transform FlowStream from a sophisticated prototype into a commercial product, and build a company that could compete in the brutal world of enterprise software. The next phase would test everything we'd learned about business development, customer acquisition, and team building. Success was no longer measured by technical elegance or investor interest, but by revenue growth and customer satisfaction. As I pulled into my apartment complex, I felt ready for that challenge. For the first time in my career, I was building something that was entirely mine, something that could change not just my own life, but the entire logistics industry. The opportunity was as intimidating as it was exciting, but I'd already proven to myself that I could handle more uncertainty and pressure than I'd ever imagined possible. The real work was just beginning, but I'd never been more confident about my ability to succeed. 18 months after closing our seed round, FlowStream Technologies occupied an entire floor of a gleaming office building in Austin's tech corridor, housing 47 employees who had transformed my basement hobby project into the fastest-growing logistics optimization platform in North America. The company's success had exceeded even our most optimistic projections, but the journey from venture-backed startup to industry leader had tested every assumption Elena and I had made about building a technology company. Our first major breakthrough came 6 months after securing initial funding, when Southwest Distribution, one of Texas's largest logistics companies, agreed to pilot FlowStream's optimization platform across their entire network. The 3-month trial generated results that stunned everyone involved, reducing their delivery costs by 38% while improving on-time performance by nearly 50%. The Southwest case study became our calling card, opening doors to conversations with enterprise customers who had previously been skeptical about adopting AI-powered optimization tools. Within a year, we had signed contracts with 12 major logistics companies, generating recurring revenue that validated our business model and attracted attention from larger venture capital firms. The growth required constant adaptation and learning. Elena and I had hired experienced executives to handle sales, marketing, and operations, surrounding ourselves with people who understood the complexities of scaling an enterprise software company. Our original roles evolved as the company matured, with Elena focusing on strategic partnerships and business development, while I led the engineering team that continued advancing FlowStream's technical capabilities. The morning that changed. Everything started like any other Wednesday, with our weekly executive team meeting reviewing customer metrics and product development priorities. We were discussing plans for international expansion when my assistant knocked on the conference room door, looking unusually flustered. "Sarah, there's someone here to see you. He says it's urgent and won't speak to anyone else." The visitor was Thomas Chen, the CEO of Global Logistics Solutions, one of the world's largest supply chain management companies. GLS operated in 43 countries and managed logistics for some of the biggest retailers and manufacturers on the planet. Their decision to visit our Austin office unannounced suggested something significant was happening. "Ms. Mitchell," Chen said as Elena and I met him in our lobby, "I apologize for arriving without an appointment, but I wanted to discuss a potential partnership that requires absolute confidentiality." We escorted him to our private conference room, where he outlined an opportunity that seemed almost too ambitious to be real. Global Logistics Solutions was planning to completely overhaul their optimization infrastructure, replacing legacy systems that had been developed over decades, with a unified platform that could handle their massive scale and complexity. We've evaluated every major player in the logistics optimization space, Chen explained, and FlowStream's AI capabilities are years ahead of anything else available. We want to discuss an exclusive licensing agreement that would integrate your technology into our global operations. Elena and I exchanged glances, trying to maintain professional composure while processing the magnitude of what he was proposing. GLS managed supply chains worth hundreds of billions of dollars annually. An exclusive licensing deal with them would transform FlowStream from a successful startup into a company with global reach and virtually unlimited growth potential. What kind of licensing terms are you considering? Elena asked, her business development instincts taking over. Chen's response exceeded our wildest expectations. Global Logistics Solutions was prepared to pay $200 million upfront for exclusive rights to FlowStream's core technology, plus revenue-sharing agreements that could generate billions in additional payments over the following decade. The proposal required complete confidentiality, while GLS conducted technical due diligence and obtained board approval for the partnership. Chen's team would spend the next month analyzing FlowStream's algorithms, testing our platform's scalability, and developing integration plans for their global network. If everything checks out, Chen concluded, we'd like to announce the partnership at the International Logistics Summit in Singapore next month. The visibility would establish FlowStream as the definitive leader in AI-powered supply chain optimization. After Chen left, Elena and I sat in stunned silence, processing what had just happened. 2 years earlier, I'd been unemployed and desperate, building FlowStream in my apartment while my family questioned whether I was taking my career seriously. Now, one of the world's largest logistics companies was offering to pay $200 million for technology I'd developed as a side project. The next month was a whirlwind of technical evaluations, legal negotiations, and strategic planning. GLS's engineering team conducted exhaustive testing of FlowStream's capabilities, pushing our algorithms to their limits with datasets representing supply chains of unprecedented complexity. Our technology performed flawlessly, handling optimization, scenarios that would have crashed conventional systems. Meanwhile, Elena negotiated contract terms with GLS's legal team, ensuring that FlowStream maintained ownership of our core intellectual property while granting the exclusive licensing rights they required. The financial terms were structured to provide immediate capital for expansion while generating long-term revenue that would fund FlowStream's growth for decades. The Singapore announcement was scheduled for the opening day of the International Logistics Summit, one of the industry's most important annual conferences. Elena and I would present FlowStream's technology to an audience of logistics executives, technology leaders, and industry analysts from around the world. 3 days before our departure for Singapore, I received an unexpected phone call from Kevin. His voice carried an excitement I hadn't heard since we were children. Sarah, I just saw the press release about your company. $200 million? Are you serious? Word of the GLS partnership had leaked earlier than planned, with industry publications reporting that FlowStream had secured the largest licensing deal in logistics technology history. The news was spreading through Austin's tech community and, beyond, generating attention that made me uncomfortable with its intensity. It's real, I confirmed. We're announcing the details officially next week at the Singapore conference. This is incredible. Do you realize what this means? You're going to be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The math was complex, involving equity dilution from multiple funding rounds and the revenue-sharing structure of the GLS deal, but Kevin's assessment wasn't far from accurate. On paper, my stake in FlowStream Technologies was worth approximately $400 million, making me one of Austin's youngest tech billionaires if the company achieved its projected growth. It's still early, I said, trying to maintain perspective. We have to execute on the partnership and continue growing the business. Sarah, you built a billion-dollar company from nothing. That's not early, that's incredible. Kevin's enthusiasm was infectious, but it also highlighted how dramatically my life had changed in ways that were still difficult to fully comprehend. 2 years ago, my family had struggled to understand why I wouldn't take a stable IT job. Now, they were reading about my success in national business publications. The Singapore conference exceeded our expectations in every possible way. Elena and I presented FlowStream's technology to a packed auditorium, demonstrating real-time optimization capabilities that generated audible gasps from the audience. The partnership announcement with Global Logistics Solutions was met with sustained applause and immediate interest from dozens of other companies. The media response was overwhelming. FlowStream's story became a case study in successful entrepreneurship, with business publications highlighting our journey from startup to industry leader. I found myself featured on magazine covers and invited to speak at conferences around the world. But the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. The University of Texas Computer Science Department invited me to deliver the keynote address at their annual graduation ceremony, speaking to the same auditorium where I'd attended classes just a decade earlier. The speech was an opportunity to reflect on the journey that had brought me from unemployed developer to technology entrepreneur. I talked about the importance of perseverance, the value of technical expertise, and the need to believe in your own ideas even when others don't. Understand them. 5 years ago, I told the graduating students, I was sitting where you are now, wondering what came next. 3 years ago, I lost my job and felt like my career was over. Today, FlowStream Technologies employs hundreds of people and processes logistics data for companies around the world. The difference wasn't luck or special connections. It was the willingness to take risks and solve problems that mattered. After the ceremony, my family joined me for dinner at the same restaurant where we'd celebrated my college graduation. The conversation was unlike anything we'd experienced before, with genuine curiosity about FlowStream's technology and respectful questions about my plans for the future. I owe you an apology, Kevin said during dessert. When you lost your job, I thought you were being impractical by focusing on that computer project instead of finding regular employment. I was wrong. The admission meant more to me than any business publication article or industry award. My family's respect had been the one validation I'd wanted, but never expected to receive. You were trying to help, I replied. We all did the best we could with the information we had. Dad, who had spent decades building his accounting practice, through careful planning and conservative decisions, seemed particularly fascinated by the entrepreneurial process. How did you know it would work? How did you have the confidence to risk everything on an untested idea? The question touched on something I'd been thinking about throughout FlowStream's growth. The truth was that I hadn't known it would work. I'd believed in the technology and seen the market opportunity, but success had required dozens of decisions made without complete information and significant risks that could have ended in failure. I didn't know it would work, I admitted, but I knew that if I didn't try, I'd always wonder what might have been possible. 6 months later, FlowStream announced our Series B funding round, raising $80 million from top-tier venture capital firms at a valuation of $1.2 billion. The milestone officially made FlowStream a unicorn startup, joining the exclusive group of privately held companies worth more than $1 billion. The funding enabled international expansion, with FlowStream offices opening in London, Tokyo, and São Paulo. Our technology was now optimizing supply chains on every continent, processing millions of logistics decisions daily, and generating cost savings measured in billions of dollars annually. The personal financial implications were staggering. My stake in FlowStream was now worth approximately $600 million, making me one of the youngest female billionaires in the technology industry. The wealth felt surreal and abstract, existing primarily as numbers on financial statements rather than anything that changed my daily life significantly. What mattered more was the impact FlowStream was having on the logistics industry and the broader economy. Our optimization algorithms were reducing shipping costs, improving delivery times, and decreasing environmental impacts for companies around the world. The technology I'd started building in my apartment was now touching millions of people's lives through faster, cheaper, more efficient delivery of goods and services. The annual family Christmas dinner that year was held at my new house, a modest but comfortable home in Austin's Hill Country that I'd purchased after the Series B round. Despite my newfound wealth, I'd chosen to maintain a relatively simple lifestyle, focused more on FlowStream's continued growth than personal luxury. As we sat around the dinner table, I reflected on how much had changed since that devastating family dinner, where I'd announced my unemployment 3 years earlier. Kevin now regularly sought my advice about his own career decisions. Jessica had started a consulting business helping other entrepreneurs navigate early-stage growth challenges. My parents had become proud ambassadors for FlowStream, telling anyone who would listen about their daughter's success. But the most important change was in my own relationship with work and success. I no longer measured my worth by others' expectations or conventional definitions of career achievement. FlowStream's success was gratifying, but what mattered most was the knowledge that I'd identified a meaningful problem and built technology that solved it effectively. "What's next for FlowStream?" Mom asked as we shared dessert. "We're exploring applications beyond logistics," I replied. "The AI optimization principles we've developed could revolutionize manufacturing, healthcare supply chains, even city traffic management. The possibilities are almost limitless." Elena, who had joined us for dinner as she had for the past 2 Christmases, added, "We're also launching a foundation to support computer science education for underrepresented students. Sarah wants to make sure other people have opportunities to pursue technical careers, even if they don't have traditional advantages." The foundation was something I'd been planning since FlowStream's valuation crossed the billion-dollar threshold. Having experienced firsthand how family understanding and support could impact someone's confidence to pursue ambitious goals, I wanted to create pathways for students who might not otherwise have access to computer science education or entrepreneurship mentorship. "That's wonderful," Dad said. "You're using your success to help other people achieve theirs." As the evening wound down and family members prepared to leave, Kevin pulled me aside for a private conversation. His expression was serious in a way that reminded me of our childhood, when he'd approach me with problems he couldn't solve alone. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest." "Of course." "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd taken that IT job I suggested? If you'd played it safe instead of betting everything on FlowStream?" The question was one I'd considered many times, especially during FlowStream's most stressful periods when success seemed uncertain and failure felt possible. The safe path would have provided steady income and job security, but it would have meant abandoning the most significant opportunity of my professional life. "I think about it sometimes," I said, "but I don't regret the choice I made." FlowStream wasn't just about building a company or making money. It was about proving to myself that I could solve problems that mattered and build something meaningful. Kevin nodded, seeming to understand something he'd been processing since FlowStream's success became undeniable. "You were right to bet on yourself. I'm proud of you for having the courage to do what the rest of us thought was impossible." Later that evening, after everyone had left and the house was quiet, I sat in my study looking at the framed photo from FlowStream's first office, a cramped co-working space where Elena and I had spent countless hours building our initial team and developing our first commercial product. The contrast with FlowStream's current headquarters was striking, but the core mission remained the same: using artificial intelligence to solve logistics problems that human analysis couldn't address effectively. My phone buzzed with a text message from Thomas Chen at Global Logistics Solutions. "Sarah, GLS board approved the expansion proposal. Ready to discuss FlowStream integration across our European and Asian operations. This could be the biggest logistics technology deployment in history." The message represented another milestone in FlowStream's growth, potentially expanding our impact to supply chains serving billions of customers worldwide. But it also reminded me of how far I'd traveled from that devastating afternoon when I'd read my termination notice in the TechFlow parking lot. The journey from unemployed developer to billionaire entrepreneur had taught me lessons about risk, perseverance, and the importance of believing in your own capabilities, even when others expressed doubt. More importantly, it had shown me that the most significant opportunities often arise from the most challenging circumstances. As I prepared for bed that night, I felt grateful not just for FlowStream's success, but for the unemployment that had forced me to discover capabilities I'd never known I possessed. Sometimes losing everything you think you want is the first step toward building something you never imagined was possible. The next morning would bring new challenges and opportunities as FlowStream continued its mission to revolutionize global logistics. But tonight, I was content to reflect on a journey that had transformed not just my career and financial situation, but my understanding of what was possible when you combined technical expertise with entrepreneurial courage and the willingness to bet on yourself when no one else would. 3 years after walking away from my family's expectations with nothing but a billion-dollar idea, I had built something that exceeded even my most ambitious dreams. The real victory wasn't the money or recognition, but the knowledge that I trusted my instincts, solved meaningful problems, and proved that sometimes the most impractical dreams turn out to be the most valuable opportunities. 5 years after FlowStream's billion-dollar valuation, I stood before the United Nations Global Innovation Summit in Geneva, addressing an audience of world leaders, technology pioneers, and policymakers about artificial intelligence's role in solving humanity's greatest logistical challenges. The woman delivering this keynote was barely recognizable as the unemployed developer who had once sat in a parking lot, devastated by a termination letter that had seemed like the end of her career. FlowStream Technologies now employed over 3,000 people across 27 countries, with our AI optimization platform processing logistics decisions for 60% of global shipping volume. The company's impact extended far beyond corporate profits, having reduced worldwide shipping emissions by 18%, while cutting delivery costs by an average of 32%, across industries ranging from humanitarian aid distribution to e-commerce fulfillment. The Geneva speech focused on FlowStream's latest initiative, a partnership with the World Food Programme to optimize food distribution in crisis zones around the globe. Our algorithms were now coordinating relief efforts in regions affected by natural disasters, armed conflicts, and economic instability, ensuring that essential supplies reached vulnerable populations with unprecedented speed and efficiency. Technology alone cannot solve human suffering, I told the assembled delegates, but when applied thoughtfully and compassionately, artificial intelligence can amplify our capacity to help those who need it most. FlowStream's optimization algorithms have reduced food delivery times to disaster zones by an average of 47%, which translates directly to lives saved and communities restored. The UN partnership represented the culmination of a personal mission that had evolved alongside FlowStream's commercial success. As the company's financial returns grew exponentially, I'd become increasingly focused on leveraging our technological capabilities to address problems that pure market forces wouldn't solve adequately. After the Geneva presentation, I was approached by Dr. Amara Okafor, the director of the World Health Organization's Emergency Response Division. She'd been following FlowStream's humanitarian applications and wanted to discuss expanding our collaboration to include medical supply optimization during health crises. Your platform's performance during the Bangladesh flooding crisis was remarkable, Dr. Okafor said, as we sat in the conference center's quiet cafe overlooking Lake Geneva. Medical supplies that typically take weeks to coordinate reached affected areas within 72 hours. That kind of efficiency transformation could revolutionize global health emergency response. The conversation led to discussions about a comprehensive partnership that would integrate FlowStream's optimization capabilities into WHO's entire emergency response infrastructure. The scope was ambitious, potentially affecting how the world responded to pandemics, natural disasters, and other health emergencies that required rapid, coordinated logistics support. What would you need from us to make this work? I asked, already mentally calculating the engineering resources required to adapt our algorithms for medical supply optimization. Primarily, we need assurance that Flowstream's commitment to humanitarian applications will continue regardless of commercial pressures or ownership changes, Dr. Okafor replied. These partnerships require long-term stability that extends beyond any individual company's business cycles. Her concern was valid and highlighted a question I'd been contemplating for months. Flowstream's astronomical valuation had attracted acquisition interest from technology giants and private equity firms offering sums that would have seemed impossible just a few years earlier. The most recent offer, from Amazon, valued the company at $12 billion and would have made me one of the wealthiest self-made women in technology history. But accepting any acquisition would likely mean subordinating Flowstream's humanitarian mission to the acquirer's profit maximization objectives. The Amazon proposal, despite its staggering financial terms, would have integrated our technology into their existing logistics infrastructure in ways that prioritized commercial applications over social impact initiatives. I can guarantee Flowstream's humanitarian commitment, I told Dr. Okafor, because I've decided not to sell the company. Our mission extends beyond generating returns for shareholders. The decision to reject Amazon's $12 billion offer had surprised everyone, including Elena, my board of directors, and the venture capital firms that had invested in Flowstream's early rounds. From a purely financial perspective, the FAO sale would have provided extraordinary returns for all stakeholders, while eliminating the ongoing risks of operating an independent company. But the Amazon discussions had clarified something fundamental about my relationship with Flowstream and the responsibility that came with building technology capable of global impact. The company had evolved beyond a vehicle for personal wealth creation into a platform for addressing systemic inefficiencies that affected millions of people worldwide. Elena and I had spent countless hours debating the acquisition decision, weighing the financial benefits against the potential consequences for Flowstream's mission and culture. Her perspective as co-founder and business partner was invaluable, but ultimately the choice required a personal assessment of what success meant beyond monetary measurements. You realize you're walking away from enough money to buy a small country, Elena had said during one of our final discussions about the Amazon offer. I'm not walking away from money, I'd replied. I'm choosing a different definition of wealth. The conversation reminded me of similar discussions I'd had with my family over the years, as Flowstream's success generated opportunities that seemed increasingly disconnected from normal human experience. My parents, who had spent their entire careers focused on financial security and retirement planning, struggled to understand why I would reject an offer that could fund several generations of descendants. Sarah, this is generational wealth, Dad had said when I'd explained my decision during our monthly family dinner. You could establish trust funds that would ensure your future children and grandchildren never have to worry about money. The hypothetical future children he referenced were part of a life path I'd never seriously considered during Flowstream's intense growth years. Building the company had consumed all my energy and attention, leaving little space for traditional personal milestones like marriage and family planning. But as Flowstream's success stabilized and my role evolved from hands-on founder to strategic leader, I'd begun contemplating what a more balanced life might look like. The question of personal relationships had become more pressing as I approached my mid-30s, particularly given the isolation that often accompanied extreme professional success. I appreciate your concern about future generations, I'd told Dad, but I'm more interested in using Flowstream's capabilities to help current generations solve problems that markets alone can't address effectively. The humanitarian partnerships were one expression of this philosophy, but I'd also been developing plans for Flowstream's long-term governance structure that would ensure the company's social mission remained protected regardless of future ownership changes or leadership transitions. Working with legal experts and philanthropic advisors, I'd established the Flowstream Foundation as an independent entity that would eventually control a majority stake in the technology company. The foundation's charter required that at least 40% of Flowstream's engineering resources be dedicated to humanitarian and public benefit applications, with profits from commercial operations, funding expanded social impact initiatives. The structure was modeled partially on Patagonia's recent ownership transfer to environmental causes, but adapted for a technology company whose primary asset was intellectual property rather than physical operations. Legal experts had warned that the arrangement was complex and potentially limiting for future strategic options, but it aligned with my conviction that Flowstream's technology represented a public good that shouldn't be subject purely to market forces. "You're basically creating a permanently mission-driven company," Elena had observed when I'd outlined the foundation structure. "That's either brilliant or completely naive." "Maybe both," I'd replied. "But it feels like the right thing to do." The foundation announcement generated significant media attention, with business publications debating whether my decision represented visionary leadership or misguided idealism. Critics argued that I was limiting Flowstream's growth potential and shortchanging investors who had expected traditional exit strategies. Supporters praised the model as innovative philanthropy that could inspire other tech leaders to prioritize social impact alongside financial returns. The reaction that mattered most came from Flowstream's employees, who responded to the foundation announcement with enthusiasm that validated my assessment of the company's culture and values. During the all-hands meeting where I'd explained the new governance structure, our head of engineering had stood up to speak for the entire development team. "This is why we joined Flowstream," she'd said. "We wanted to work on technology that actually improves the world, not just generates shareholder returns. The foundation structure ensures we can continue doing that regardless of what happens to the business side of the company." Similar sentiments had been expressed throughout our global offices, with employees sharing stories about how Flowstream's humanitarian applications had motivated them to remain with the company despite recruitment offers from higher-paying competitors. The foundation structure had formalized a mission that had already been driving our best people's commitment to the work. 6 months after establishing the Flowstream Foundation, I received an unexpected invitation to speak at my old high school's career day. The request came from Mrs. Patterson, my former computer science teacher, who had followed Flowstream's success through local news coverage and wanted me to share my story with current students. The high school visit was scheduled for a Friday afternoon, with presentations to multiple classes throughout the day. I'd agreed partly out of gratitude to Mrs. Patterson, who had encouraged my early interest in programming, but also because I was curious about how students would respond to Flowstream's story and the broader possibilities of technology careers. The first presentation was to Mrs. Patterson's advanced computer science class, a group of seniors who were considering college majors and early career paths. Their questions were sophisticated and reflected a generation that had grown up with smartphones and social media, but might not fully understand the career possibilities that technology development could provide. "Did you always know you wanted to start your own company?" asked a student who introduced herself as Maria, a first-generation college applicant whose parents worked in service industries. The question prompted me to reflect on my own high school experience and the limited vision I'd had for my future at that age. Honestly, I had no idea what entrepreneurship involved when I was your age. I just loved solving problems with code and wanted to build things that worked better than existing solutions. "But how did you know your idea would be successful?" asked another student. "What if you'd failed and wasted all that time?" The question highlighted the risk aversion that seemed to characterize many young people's approach to career planning, possibly reflecting economic uncertainty and the high cost of college education. Their concerns were valid, but they also suggested a limited understanding of how most successful ventures actually developed. "I didn't know it would be successful," I replied. "In fact, I expected it might fail. But I also realized that not trying would guarantee failure, while trying at least offered the possibility of success." The conversation continued for another hour, covering everything from technical skills development to work-life balance to the responsibilities that came with business success. The students were engaged and thoughtful, asking questions that forced me to articulate aspects of my journey that I'd never had to explain before. What advice would you give to someone who wants to start a technology company but doesn't have family support or financial resources? Asked Maria during the final minutes of the presentation. The question resonated personally, reminding me of my own family's initial skepticism and the financial pressures that had made FlowStream's early development so stressful. But it also highlighted the systemic barriers that prevented many talented people from pursuing entrepreneurial opportunities. First, focus on building skills that are valuable regardless of whether you start your own company, I said. Programming, data analysis, and problem-solving capabilities will serve you well in any technology career. Second, look for mentors and communities that understand what you're trying to accomplish, even if your family doesn't initially get it. And third, remember that most successful companies start as side projects or solutions to problems the founders experienced personally. After the presentation, Mrs. Patterson walked me to my car, thanking me for taking time to speak with her students. Our conversation turned to broader questions about education and opportunity access that had been raised during the classroom discussions. Several of my best students come from families that don't understand technology careers, she said. They're incredibly talented, but they lack the confidence and resources to pursue opportunities that could transform their lives. The observation aligned with research I'd been reading about persistent gaps in technology career access, particularly for students from low-income families and underrepresented communities. Talent was distributed equally across demographic groups, but opportunity access remained highly correlated with family background and geographic location. What would make the biggest difference for students like Maria? I asked. Mrs. Patterson had clearly thought about this extensively. Scholarships help, but what they really need is mentorship and exposure to real technology work environments. Most of them have never met someone who builds software for a living, so they can't envision themselves in those roles. The conversation planted the seeds for what would become FlowStream Academy, an intensive summer program that provided comprehensive technology education and career preparation for high school students from underrepresented backgrounds. The program combined technical skills development with business training, entrepreneurship education, and mentorship from FlowStream employees and other technology professionals. Planning for FlowStream Academy consumed much of my attention over the following months, as Elena and I worked with education experts to design a curriculum that would genuinely prepare students for technology careers while building their confidence to pursue ambitious goals. The program's first cohort included 40 students from high schools across Texas, selected based on academic performance, demonstrated interest in technology, and financial need. Maria was among the first students accepted, having submitted a compelling application essay about her dreams of using artificial intelligence to improve healthcare access in underserved communities. The 10-week program was held at FlowStream's headquarters, giving students direct exposure to professional, software development environments while they worked on individual projects under the guidance of our engineering team. The experience was designed to be transformative, showing students that technology careers were accessible and providing them with skills and networks that would support their future educational and professional development. "This is what I want to do with my life," Maria told me during the program's final presentation day, where students demonstrated the software applications they'd built during their FlowStream Academy experience. Her project was a mobile app that used machine learning to help Spanish-speaking patients navigate complex healthcare systems, combining her personal family experience with advanced technical capabilities she'd developed during the program. The Academy's success exceeded our expectations, with 38 of the 40 participants enrolling in computer science or related programs at four-year universities, many receiving full scholarships based partly on the portfolio work they'd completed during their FlowStream experience. More importantly, the students had developed confidence and technical skills that would serve them throughout their careers, regardless of their specific career paths. "You've created something special," Elena observed as we reviewed the program's first-year outcomes. "These students aren't just learning to code, They're learning to see themselves as problem solvers and innovators. The Academy program was expanding to include students from other states and countries, with FlowStream's international offices developing localized versions adapted to their regional educational systems and economic conditions. The goal was to reach thousands of students annually, providing technology career pathways that wouldn't otherwise exist in their communities. As FlowStream's 10th anniversary approached, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had transformed a desperate, unemployed developer into someone whose decisions affected global logistics systems and whose educational initiatives were changing lives across multiple continents. The scale of impact was humbling and occasionally overwhelming, but it also represented the fulfillment of possibilities I'd never imagined when I'd first started coding optimization algorithms in my apartment. The anniversary celebration was held at FlowStream's original co-working space in Austin, now transformed into a museum documenting the company's evolution from startup to global platform. Elena and I had insisted on a modest celebration that focused on recognizing employees and partners rather than congratulating ourselves on financial achievements. During my brief remarks to the assembled team, I tried to articulate what FlowStream's success meant beyond metrics and valuations. 10 years ago, we set out to solve logistics problems that seemed intractable. Today, our algorithms process millions of optimization decisions daily, but our real achievement is proving that technology companies can prioritize social impact alongside financial success. The speech concluded with an announcement that surprised even Elena and our board of directors. After months of planning and legal preparation, I was transferring my entire stake in FlowStream Technologies to the FlowStream Foundation, ensuring that the company would remain permanently focused on humanitarian applications and social impact initiatives. The decision meant walking away from personal wealth that Forbes estimated at over $2 billion, but it also guaranteed that FlowStream's mission would continue regardless of future market conditions or leadership changes. The company would operate as a sustainable social enterprise, generating sufficient profits to fund operations and expansion while directing all excess returns toward educational programs, humanitarian partnerships, and research initiatives. You've basically given away one of the largest personal fortunes in technology history, Elena said after the announcement, her expression mixing admiration with concern about the precedent I was setting. I've given it away to ensure it continues. Doing work that matters, I replied. Money is only valuable if it's creating positive change in the world. The foundation transfer generated international media attention, with commentators debating whether my decision represented enlightened leadership or economic naivety. Several other technology entrepreneurs publicly endorsed the model, suggesting they were considering similar structures for their own companies, but the response that meant most came from Maria, now a sophomore studying computer science at Stanford on a full scholarship partly funded by FlowStream Academy. Her email was brief but captured something essential about why I'd made the foundation decision. Ms. Mitchell, thank you for showing me that success isn't just about making money. It's about using whatever resources you have to help other people achieve their dreams. I'm going to remember that when I start my own company someday. The message reminded me of the phone call I'd received from Kevin 8 years earlier, when he'd congratulated me on FlowStream's first major investment and asked whether I ever wondered what would have happened if I'd taken the safe path he'd recommended. The question had seemed important then, but now felt irrelevant. I hadn't just built a successful company. I'd discovered that the most meaningful achievements came from using success to expand opportunities for others. The unemployed developer, who had once sat in a parking lot, devastated by job loss, had found something more valuable than financial security or professional validation. She'd found purpose that extended far beyond personal success, creating technology that solved meaningful problems while building pathways for others to pursue their own ambitious dreams. The journey from unemployment to global impact had taught me that the most transformative opportunities often emerge from the most challenging circumstances, but only if you're willing to bet on yourself when no one else will. Standing in FlowStream's Original office space, surrounded by employees whose careers had been built on technology I'd first imagined during the darkest period of my professional life, I understood that losing my job hadn't been a setback. It had been the catalyst that revealed possibilities I'd never known existed. The billion-dollar idea I'd walked away with had become something even more valuable. A platform for demonstrating that technology companies could prioritize human welfare alongside financial returns, and that individual success was most meaningful when it enabled others to achieve their own extraordinary goals. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.